It looks like we're getting a good number of people who are now logging in. If you want to make sure that you're on mute when you come in, that would be great. And then we can hear everyone without the background noise. Why don't I do a little bit of the logistics while people are logging in? So my name is Eric Kilstrom, and I am chair of Open Age. Very pleased to have today's session. Not only do we have great people, we got really great content, and Open Age is a great organization that we're really excited to share some of the great work that has been done and will be doing going forward on all of this. So just want to make sure that we'll record today's session so we can catch up with it later. So why don't we dig in? Is that all right, Ian? Shall I head off?
Yeah, sure, you have to kick off. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone. Really pleased to have you here. Today's an important day for us in the sense that the lockdown and our experience with the pandemic was a difficult period for people in the UK, but there are silver linings. And one of the things that Ian will talk about, we've got a great lineup. Our CEO, Ian Cassidy, will talk about the organization and what we did. We've got Helen Crampon, who is the innovation lead at Innovate UK for healthy aging, and her experience looking at the wider picture and how this fits in and why they decided to invest in this project to allow the scaling is really important. And then Alex is here to talk to us about the evidence that came out and the case study that came out of the work that we had done during lockdown. So we were an organization that was 100% in person before lockdown. And Ian, I promise not to steal more of your thunder. I tend to do that, so I'll be short on my side. But really excited about Open Age and what Ian and the team are doing in terms of engaging with older adults. And not only are they fun, but they're also healthy. And they do that in a way that I think is talking to people's aspirations, not their deficits. And design and language, I think, to me, are really important to having impact at scale. And Open Age has been around now for 25 years, but I think it's been almost an open secret in the sense that there's a lot of what the organization does to help people live better for longer. But we've been 100% in person in London, and there's magic that we're looking to bottle and share and scale across more of the UK. We will go through how that works, what we did during lockdown and some of the magic that we want to scale. But I will introduce the various players, and then we'll have some panel discussion as we go forward. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A section. We'll look at both sections, and we'll get to those during the panel discussion. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Ian, who is our CEO.
Thanks, Eric. Let me just, thanks, someone's already pinned me, that's marvelous, excellent. All right, thanks very much. Great to see so many people here to hear about our exciting bit of research and plans for the future. So I'm just going to kick off telling you a little bit about Open Age, who we are, what we do, and as Eric mentioned, kind of how we responded to the challenge of lockdown and why that then led to us commissioning the piece of research that Alex is going to be talking about shortly. So I've got a short presentation. Let me just open up my screen. Oh, I did have a short presentation. Hold on one sec. Which I can't now seem to find. Give me 2 seconds. Technology failing right at the start, always a good sign. All right. Share screen. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so let me just put that on presentation mode. So a little bit about OpenAge as terms of background. So OpenAge is a free-to-join, member-led charity. So we've got roughly 3,000 active members in Northwest London. And what we mean by a member is anyone over the age of 50, but the vast majority of our members are between the kind of sort of 65 and 85, most of them really between the 70 and 80 mark. And someone active is someone who's taken part in an activity of some description over the last year. In essence, we try and keep our members healthier, happier, and crucially for us, and I do mean crucially, having fun for longer. We're all about making sure that later life is still a fun and fulfilling time. We do this through running a very vast array of high quality, low cost group activities that our members can take part in. And really, I think kind of important that you bear in mind throughout this presentation that we are talking about group activities, so fully interactive activities, obviously in person. That's nice and easy because there's a group of you in a room, online a little bit more difficult. Where historically have we delivered these activities from? So we operate our own 3 centres in Northwest London. We've got 2 of them in Kensington and Chelsea, 1 of them in, well, 1.5, 1 plus a hub in Westminster. And we also operate from a whole host of community venues, church halls, other charity organisations, community halls, the sorts of venues you'll be very familiar with. And the activities we offer can, broadly speaking, be categorised into 3 categories. So physical activity, so that's anything from ballet, boxing, Zumba, Tai Chi, yoga, your kind of sort of standard group-based physical activity that many of you will be familiar with for older people. We also offer a slightly more clinical programme as well, so that's maybe aimed at a slightly frailer older person or an older person that has some greater needs. So we do a strength and balance program, we do a bone density and bone strength program, and also a healthy lungs program, primarily aimed at older people with COPD. And I suppose so far, so what? And the so what for us really is the scale at which we operate. So pre-pandemic, and I say that a lot these days, pre-pandemic, I'm sure many people on the call will notice there has been a change since the pandemic, but pre-pandemic, we ran roughly 250 different activities each week from roughly 50 to 60 different venues, reaching roughly 12 to 1,500 older people each and every week. So really the so what for me is the scale at which we operate. There's quite as many local charities that are delivering quite as large a programme of activities. Now that's fantastic, it's great. We've done it for, as Eric said, for about 20 to 25 years. We knew what we were doing. And then, of course, along came lockdown. As again, I don't need to tell anyone on this call, not a great time to be running an organisation that's wholly dedicated towards bringing groups of random older people together to participate for an hour in a poorly ventilated space. So of course, like the rest of society, we had to shut down. What that meant was that we had 3,000 members for whom we were unable to deliver anything. Up until that point, we had never delivered anything online at all, not a single activity. So very quickly, we wanted to test whether we could translate what we did in person into online. So you can see that we started off with a really limited trial. We selected some of our slightly more digitally engaged members. We reached out to them. We tried to develop a program of around about 25 hours, so about 25 different activities over a couple of weeks to see how it worked. And we were not only surprised ourselves, but our members surprised us as well, to the extent to which there was demand for the activity. By July 2020, we were running a program of over 100 hours each week of online activities. At our peak during the periods of 2 lockdown, we delivered about 120 hours of online activities each week. And again, I refer you back to my previous comment, each of those activities were small groups, roughly kind of 10 to 20 people, fully interactive, still tutor-led, and essentially doing the same types of physical activity, arts and culture, and learning activities that we used to provide in person. We were very aware that a lot of our members were digitally excluded. So we developed a how to use Zoom program in order to try and help those people get online. I'll tell you a little bit about that in the next slide. But the upshot is that throughout the period of lockdown, over 1,800 of our members engaged with us online. So roughly a third to half of our current membership decided to get online and take part, which I think anyone that works with older people would probably find that percentage quite high. I know we certainly did. We weren't expecting that many people to engage. And roughly about 4,500 people were regularly engaging each week. So they were coming back and again taking part. And that quote, which actually is hidden by your faces at the moment, you got moved it, to me is just absolutely kind of sort of perfect for describing the feedback that we got from our members. Not only were they excited to be able to take part, but they were excited to be able to do something that perhaps they themselves and certainly others had decided they might not want to do or might not be able to do. So there, that lady saying she just sent a text message to her daughter-in-law to let her know she'd done the Pilates session online after her son's forever telling her that she didn't know what to do on a computer. And I think a lot of us can relate to hearing messages like that. The how to use Zoom sessions were absolutely crucial to what we were doing. We know we're working with a group who may have less technical expertise than other groups. So we essentially developed a program where we asked people to let us know what device they had. We would curate those groups according to devices, very small groups of around about 6 people. It would be a telephone conference call. Everyone would be given the information, they would dial in, there would be an IT tutor on that call. They'd talk them through how to set up a Zoom account, how to use their email address as a login. Once they had that set up, there would then be a link sent out to a specific Zoom call. People would then be able to join into that, at which point the training session would move over onto Zoom. Again, to an extent, there's an element of so far so what with that. And again, I come back to the numbers. In that first period of lockdown, we trained over 360 of our members how to do that online. It was a massive effort from Open Age. But what we realized is that there was such a demand for it. And I think that piece of feedback there, 84% of members that we surveyed afterwards said that they didn't find it as intimidating with IT as they had before. And again, I think it's just a perfect example of where there's a will, there's a way, and by taking the time of taking that slow, solid, personalized approach, people can get online. At Open Age, we are a member-led organisation, so kind of it wouldn't be great for me to go any further without really bringing the voices of our members to you in terms of what it meant for them. I'll let you read these at your own leisure. I'm not going to read them out, but I think you can see the thread that comes through them is about people feeling included, about people feeling that they had other options to engage, and also the fact that people were being treated with respect throughout the process. They felt that they had the trust, the encouragement to be able to take part. That was in the period of lockdown. I just want to kind of sort of, again, put this in numbers for you. So over the year, the financial year 2021, so April to end of March, everything we did was online. We ran over 4,000 different activities in that year. Just over 1,500 members took part in at least one session, and there was over 40,000 individual attendances by older people. Now, I wanted to show this slide for 2 reasons. One, the numbers. I think we need to keep coming back to the fact that loads of people were taking part, loads of older people were taking part. There was demand. This wasn't a flash in the pan. People were quite happy to continue to do it and continue to take part. And then the impact at the end there, not only were people taking part, but they were seeing really positive impact from their engagement as well. 78% of members reporting an improvement in well-being, 61% of members of level of physical activity improved, from online activity. This is from online activity, so they were able to do exercise and still felt the physical level of physical activity was improving. Increased number of friends, so that connection, that motivation as well there. So what did we learn? We learned from the entire process that barriers to access can be overcome given the right incentive. Now, I recognise there was a huge incentive with the fact that there was a national lockdown. People couldn't get anywhere, but the fact still remains, given the right incentive, sold the right way, barriers can be overcome. We recognise that trust was absolutely crucial. We know that it's because it was open age that was delivering the how to deliver Zoom sessions that people were willing to take part. They told us that other people had tried to teach them, their kids had tried to teach them, but they used to get annoyed because people would get frustrated with them, or people would talk to them as if they were stupid. Well, they knew Open Age wasn't going to do that. Open Age is the same organisation that they've been coming to for classes for the last 20 years. So they knew that they'd trust in us as an organisation to help them. We know there's still demand. We're now operating a hybrid model, so about 10 to 15% of our delivery is still online. We've managed to secure around about £300,000 to continue the digital inclusion work. So that's for a digital project in Northwest London that Open Age is leading on with a variety of Age UKs in order to try and skill up around about 700 older people through devices and data. So really looking at not just the skills, but looking at the ability to get online through having a device or through being able to access that data. We're an adult community learning provider, and we've put a renewed focus on IT. It's interesting, we've got a lot of feedback during lockdown from our members saying, I've seen your IT classes for the last 5 years, and I really wish I'd done it now, because they were stuck. And I think it's interesting, there's perhaps more of a motivation now among older people to recognise that this isn't just a nice to have anymore, it's something that kind of really is important to be able to access services. And we've offered an increased amount of one-to-one support. We also recognise that online's here to stay, so we invested in a new database. And the reason we invested in that new database is that we reckon that online delivery for older people and online group activities for older people is here to stay. But we wanted to test those assumptions, and that's what leads us to the research. Alex will tell you all about that research in a second, but we were delighted to be able to secure funding from the National Lottery and from Dunhill Medical, who are here today as well, to help us go out and speak to a whole group of older people, a whole group of other older people's organisations, to find out whether their experiences were the same as us, to whether they'd come to the same conclusions as us or not. We're also delighted to say that as a result of the research and as a result of our initial investment in a new database, we've secured funding from Innovate UK through the, I've made a typo there, I do apologise. So that should be, say, secured Innovate UK through the SBRI funding programme for healthy aging. So Helen can correct me at a later date when she speaks. But delighted to say we've received significant funding from Innovate UK to work with organisations such as housing associations, community health organisations, and adult social care. So organisations that have existing cohorts of older people, as well as working with older people themselves to design, develop, and build a new open age online service. We've just finished the discovery phase of that. We're just about to start the technical build, and we'd be excited to speak to anyone on this call that might want to find out more about that, or anyone that might want to partner with us on it. But we hope to have the first example of that towards the end of the year. That's me, really. That's just a little bit of Open Age and what we did and how we responded to lockdown. But what we're really here today to hear about is the research that we commissioned. So we're really lucky to have Alex Evans that took part in that, and I'm happy to hand over to him now.
Great, thanks very much, Ian. Right, I'm just going to share my screen.
Oh, do you know what, Alex, before you do that, I've just been prompted, I do apologise. What I wanted to do was to show you a video just before we do this, if that's all right.
Sure.
And what I think it can be quite dry, some of these things, Jen. It's me telling you information, it's Alex going to tell you information. I said right at the start that OpenAge is a member-led organisation. So we did go out to our members and we asked our members, look, what did OpenAge mean to you during lockdown? What was it? What was your experience and how did we impact it? And we've got a really short video. It's only a couple of minutes long, but I'm going to endeavour to play just now. So I'm going to open it up. And I'm going to share my screen. Give me 2 secs. So there. All right. Can you see that?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. Can you hear it?
Yes.
The lockdown impacted a great deal.
Everything just disappeared.
It's been very negative to my life.
You know, the government's saying, "No, don't get on the bus and don't go anywhere if you don't have to."
You know, it's quite lonely.
The periods of fear and anger.
It just made me feel anxious as a whole. I had a lot more negative thoughts.
Waking up and just thinking, how can I carry on?
Without OpenAge, it would have been disastrous.
When I lost my job, I would have been completely lost.
Trying to have a class every day.
I have benefited physically and mentally more than I can say.
It literally gives me something to get up for.
This opened up a new world for me, you know.
You also get to make friends, online friends.
Yeah, it's a lifeline for people.
But the most important therapy is to be able to see somebody higher.
And you make friends as well. When you're on a course, you're chatting to somebody.
Well, this is an organisation that does classes for older and retired people, but it's far more than that.
For me, OpenAge is like an extended family.
It is a big part of my life.
This is meant to be a really inclusive community.
It's a lifesaver for me, really.
A godsend.
If you can imagine if that didn't exist, what the problem would be.
I don't think I would have got through the lockdown without OpenAge.
This is one of my favourite things now, waving at people on Zoom.
I hope you agree it was worthwhile waiting for that video, and I apologise that I forgot to play it to start with. I just think it really brings to life the fact that, yes, fair enough, lockdown was a particular period in time, but I think it really does bring to life the fact that you do get benefits from online activities. And again, I think a good segue now over to the research from Alex.
Before Alex, you start, I wanted to properly introduce you, if that's all right. Ian and as the CEO is sort of easy to introduce. Alex, I'm not sure many of the members know of you, so if you don't mind, I'll just quickly introduce you and your background. So Dr. Alex Evans is an independent researcher and consultant. He's worked in health and social care for over 20 years, including 10 years in senior leader in London Charities. He's particular expertise in place-based community-led projects, has worked extensively on projects to support older people as well as the field of digital inclusion. He'll be speaking to his research on the impacts on the online delivery of older adults during COVID-19. So there we go. Over to you, Alex. I just wanted to properly introduce you. You have great experience. I think everyone should know.
Thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you very much indeed, everyone, for having me. Thank you to the people who funded the research, and thank you to everyone who came, and thank you to OpenAge for giving me the opportunity to do this fascinating project, which has really been one of the most interesting I've ever undertaken. So let me just share my screen now. Okay, can I check that everybody can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, so thanks again. So just to start by talking a little bit about the research. So as Ian said, a huge amount of work happened at OpenAge. And when I first talked to them, they were just really interested to know, first of all, with their own users, what had people's experiences been? And why was it that older people were still using those online activities? Because a lot of people expected that those would kind of drift off afterwards, but people were still using them. They also wanted to know what other people were doing, and what other organizations were doing, and whether that was still continuing after lockdown, because of course OpenAge had had a great experience, but had others. And then as a part of that, I guess the end goal is to know what's the potential for this type of activity to become a sort of ongoing tool for improving the quality of life for older people. If it's a useful tool to have in the toolbox, then we need to know. So we wanted to talk to people and find out what older people's experiences were. We wanted to find out what organizations' experiences were, and essentially, why have people continued to do this after lockdown? And then in some cases they haven't, and if not, why not? So just a quick bit about methodology here. I'll be quick. This was in-depth qualitative research, sort of focusing on voices and experiences. We talked to around 50 older people who were involved with various different older people support organizations. So not just OpenAge, but a wide range of others. We used focus groups, interviews, case studies, and purposive sampling, which means that we identified who we think would give us the best information and the best picture. And we made sure that we covered both current users, past users, and non-users. And then we also talked to staff from a spread of 10 organizations across the UK, actually more than 10, about 12, I think, in the end, including charities who are actually delivering services, housing organizations, and also just some representatives from the NHS and from charitable funders. So we'll cover a little bit of all those things as we go. And just to start with this, I want to be really clear with everyone, as I think Ian was, that we're all very aware that digital exclusion has not gone away. And I think I've put this here. I often talk about this as being almost a glass half empty, glass half full paradigm, in the sense that we talk an awful lot about all the people who are excluded by digital activities, potentially. But often that means that we don't talk so much about who might be included. And so just a few key figures. If you think, yes, 53% of people over 70 do not use or have access to the internet at home. On the other hand, 77% of people over 65 do have that. If you think about that, even in terms of the future, in 5 years, that will be 77% of over 70s. You'll be impressed by my maths there. So, you know, there's a real sense here that time moves on. Could we have believed how different the world is 3 years later from, you know, where we were 3 years ago? So I think it's really important that we bear in mind what can help and what can change, and the fact that we include people as well as exclude them. So some very dry stuff about research perspectives, just to say you'll all be aware probably that there are lots of government policy drives at the moment with adult care social care reform, the Department of Health's digital plan for health and social care. Lots of really exciting stuff happening in the housing sector. So you've seen key initiatives like the TAPI inquiry and Invite, both of which I think were also supported by Dunhill Medical Trust. In terms of academic work, there have been quite a lot of systematic reviews over the years, but they have very inconsistent findings. One of the reasons is that they're often really struggling to compare like with like. So you can't compare a WhatsApp group with this kind of activity. They're all different things. You can't just lump them all under digital and think that they'll say the same thing. There have been a lot of quite interesting academic studies that have come out since the pandemic that were done during it. And I think I've seen quite a sea change in terms of academic thought around the possibilities. But I think that's because people are getting very different data than they were before, because so much has changed. And just to say that some of the key mental health charities now are noting that digital can have a really important impact on people's loneliness. So Mental Health Foundation, Campaign to End Loneliness. But at the same time, let's never forget that there are lots and lots of offline people in general, most of whom are older people, and that's highlighted repeatedly. For example, Age UK had a good report recently about older people who don't live their lives online and so on. So that's really important to remember. So on to the interesting stuff. So we wanted to talk to older people and find out why do you use these activities, and especially why do you continue to use them? And so what we found was that they said it greatly reduced their sense of loneliness and isolation. And they got a real sense of community and belonging. And I mean, this was most of all important to people who lived on their own and otherwise wouldn't really have much in the way of networks. So someone said, you know, it's really valuable, especially if you live on your own. I'm on my own quite a lot of the time. It's been a lifeline. And lifeline and godsend were, I think, the two phrases that I heard most often in all of the interviews that I did. You know, there's a real sense of importance here for people. The other thing that people talked about quite powerfully was the idea that this kind of activity could give people structure and purpose and meaning. Now, I think we all know, certainly from my experience of working in community settings with older people and in general, people get a sense of structure from that, especially when retirement comes. Sometimes people feel a little bit rudderless and a little bit unsure, but these kind of things can give people a real sense of meaning and structure and purpose continuing. And people said, you know, otherwise you have these endless hours filled with nothing. And I pushed on that a bit. Were you just talking about lockdown? And for a lot of people, they said, well, it was more in lockdown, but actually it's the same the rest of the time as well. If you don't have things to do. So lockdown was just more of the same, you know, for a lot of people. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting was that for a lot of people, they were able to maintain a sort of social continuity. So, for example, they would normally go to community activities in person, but as their mobility reduced, or as their health worsened, or for all sorts of reasons, some people moved to different housing in different parts of the country, they could actually still connect with their friends who they used to see in person. And even if it was new friends they'd only met online, it gave them a real continuity in their lives. So that was hugely important. More practical things. Obviously, transport was a huge thing. When you listen to older people's stories about what it's like to try and get across London, you know, hours on end, never mind across sort of 50-mile distances in rural areas, which we'll talk about later, this makes a huge difference to people's lives because it's uncomfortable and it's unpleasant a lot of the time to do that traveling. The other thing that we found, and I urge you to take a look in the report at some of the examples here, were real benefits for carers, because of course they didn't necessarily have to leave their loved ones, people with disabilities for obvious reasons, and of course we've also seen big increases in the amount of agoraphobia amongst older people, even especially since the pandemic. Agoraphobia being a general problem for people who are sort of older and quite lonely and isolated, but it's got so much worse. So we saw loads of examples. Just to say also, there was some really interesting stuff about dementia there. And I think that we found really surprising was that actually people with dementia responded very well to these kind of activities. And also the thing was, because they were there, they could be there with their carers. It gave them this better kind of connection than they might have been otherwise. So it meant that their carers could be a much better and closer part of this. I mean, informal carers here, family carers. In general, another thing that people said was it just allowed them to do more. So it meant they could get out and about and stay more active. And it gave them more choice. If you've got lots of things happening like Open Age has, you know what? I would never say a word against bingo, because bingo is incredibly important to a lot of people. And I hate it when people use this as an example of something really boring. People love it, but it's not for everyone. Just as, you know, sort of opera lessons aren't for everyone. The point is, you have lots of things for people to do, because it's not just about the simple social thing. People want to do things they're interested in too. So this is a possibility to do much more. And what you see is people who become sort of power users. They actively design their day and they actively design their week, which people already do, I think, in community centre settings, but in a sense, because they've got more stuff, if they take this approach and they can do both, it gives them even more structure and even more choice. And for others, it was really interesting that people saw it as an insurance policy. And they said, well, you know, I can get out and about now. That's all very well. But what's going to happen if I get housebound? And someone said, you should think about it now, because if you ever get to the stage where you're housebound and you can't go out, well, this will be your only lifeline. So people were really thinking about what the future might hold as well. So what we saw in general was, I won't read this out, but in general are two sort of personas. One is someone who is really actively enjoying their retirement. They've got good mobility, a lively social life, and they just want to do more and they want to stay active. And then you've got someone for whom this really is a lifeline. They barely get out. They can only go out maybe when a minibus is provided or when they've got special transport, or even that is difficult. One woman I talked to had 2 broken legs. you know, so just couldn't get out at all. She said that this changed everything for her. Without it, there would be nothing. So, you know, hugely important for both of those groups of people, thinking preventatively as well as in terms of the issues that people are facing now. Now, the other thing I really want to stress is that we're not talking here about, quote, silver surfers. And, you know, there's sort of been this long sort of almost a stereotype or an archetype, really, of some older people who are really into technology and they're really up for it. You know, the thing is, I did talk to someone who was one of the earliest programmers of databases on the BBC Micro. Okay, but she's an outlier, you know, incredibly impressive outlier, but nonetheless an outlier. And there are people, of course, who can barely do anything at all or nothing, but most of the people were in between. And what they would say was, I don't really like that techie stuff, but needs must. So they would find that, yeah, often this wasn't what they'd be choosing to do, but the practicality was this was going to get them what they needed. So they'd do it if they could. And most of them were just at a sort of level of basic competence. What you often found was a really interesting sort of patchwork of skills, which I have too, right? You know, so I think we all have, where there was a lady who said, well, you know, I'm not good with technology. Look at me, I've got one of those phones for the elderly. And of course, she's using an iPad at the same time, but she knows how to use what she knows how to use. And it's like me, you know, at a certain point, I said, okay, I'm not going as far as TikTok. Facebook was the end for me. You know, you reach that point where you say, I know what I know, and this is enough, and I'll learn other things if I want, you know. So I think the other thing to get across is that this idea of a digital divide, this black and white thing, is super simplistic and not really helpful at this stage of the game. The other thing that Ian referred to, which I think is true, and this made me very upset, was how much really competent people have their confidence undermined by what other people say. And so there was a lady who said that people just shush you away. They say, it's not for you. It's not for you. Don't worry yourself. And I thought, you know, she was incredibly competent. I think she'd even taught IT at one point, but everyone told her that she wasn't good at this kind of thing. And I often hear people who've got very high levels of IT skill being told that they can't do something when actually the evidence is that they can, they're doing it. And the final thing is sorry, not the final whole thing, but the final thing on here is that the older people are very resourceful at finding support. So yes, it might be that someone approaches them and offers it, but there were older people who said, well, I was fed up, so I went next door to my neighbor and I banged on the door and I said, here, can you help me with this? You know, there's a lot of very proactive people there, like all of us, right? You know, who say, this is what I need, I'm going to find a way to get it. And then you do have organizations as well who can help if you don't have family or friends who can. So just looking here at some barriers and some drawbacks, it's not a 100% positive picture because it's not right for everyone. So one of the things that came across very strongly, and again, it's very frustrating, was older people saying that they were so tired of being bullied into using online services, and that actually anything online was always about taking something away. And of course it is. I'm sitting here now where I live and there are no branches of my banks left on the high street. There's nowhere to go. You know, it's getting to the stage where everyone's being told, they were saying, even to get a bus pass, you know, I've got to have a smartphone. I don't have a smartphone. What am I going to do? So technology becomes about taking things away, not giving them. And there was a particularly sort of telling moment when a man who hadn't wanted to take part in the group took me to one side at the end just because he'd heard about the fact that it was around something digital. And he said, the thing is about you, you don't really care about us. You say you do, but you don't. I'm 86, my wife is 92. We're not going to get online and do all that stuff. And he said, you could have just waited, but you didn't. And there's this sense that actually we can't stop giving people access to the things that they want or need just because there is some technological solution that if we squish them hard enough into the hole, they might be able to use, you know. So it's about making sure that technology is about giving people options, not about taking them away. The other thing they found, which will be a surprise to no one, was that there's a lot of social awkwardness on Zoom and there's a big learning curve, which I too remember. And some people got through that, some didn't. They thought it wasn't worth it. And one of the most common issues was just that it's not the same. And so some people thought it was a poor relation. And for some people, the benefits that they got from it just weren't enough to get over the fact that it wasn't the same. But again, what I would say, there was a moment in one of the groups where I said to people, so listen, if, and this was people who were quite against it, I said, if suddenly you found that you couldn't get out anymore, and this was your only option, what would you think then? And it was like a cold wind blew through the room. And suddenly almost everyone in the room said, oh, well, okay, actually, yeah, then I'd think about it again. So I think, again, there's a sort of pragmatism there that if people have the support, they might do that if they were in a position where they had to. So it's worth bearing in mind. So just talking a bit now about organizations, what came across with the organizations who delivered this stuff was that they were not at all sure that this was going to be a success. They just gave it a try, like Ian said. And people said before the pandemic, we really thought that no older people would take part in online activities. But now post-lockdown, we've really changed our minds. Some didn't try them out and still felt uncertain about it. But actually, I have to say, through this process and through them talking about it, they started to think that maybe it was something they might want to look at. And one of the strongest things that we found, one of the most sort of positive responses was people who were working in rural areas and who said that in some cases, obviously, geography didn't matter. So if you've got people who are having to get a taxi 50 miles through rural Yorkshire in a horrible bone-shaking taxi on a busy road, on a, you know, up and down road, and you've got horrible osteoarthritis, you know, who wants that? So it does make a big difference. And it also meant that, for example, people's carers could come along as well, which is not to say, again, there are still rural barriers. One group I talked to said, well, you don't have to go far out of town here to find people who don't have mains electricity, never mind who don't have broadband. And I think, again, what they said was that they changed their perspective partly because they'd always thought in terms of digital exclusion rather than inclusion. And they had found that it really included some people who otherwise weren't, particularly people who were carers. And what they said now was that where possible and where they had the money, hybrid was going to be the new normal for them because it was all about choice. So by hybrid, I mean people offering some things online and some things in person, and sometimes both at once. And they said for more older people now, it's an option, not a necessity, but we're building in the digital as an option. Now, the barriers they faced were not things that will be any surprise to you. The support around technology was the biggest barrier of all. Even in organizations which had pretty good technology skills, the amount of work, especially, of course, at the start of, you know, a period when they had to help everyone get online was huge. But they did note that actually over time, they realized that that might become less of a problem. There was also something around staff skills and attitudes to technology. And what a couple of people mentioned was that staff were so anxious about technology that they felt that they passed on that anxiety to potential users. And sort of said, well, the old people won't want it, when really what they were saying was, well, we don't want it. So that's a sort of a common issue, I think, and something that needs to be addressed by building people's confidence. And of course, it may just be that they're right and they know that they're people they help know that, you know. And again, those beliefs about digital exclusion, that by doing this, we will be excluding people. But if you looked at the enablers and what set apart people who had successful experiences here, it was really a willingness to trial and potentially to fail. Might get absolutely no one turning up, and we might get that for 3 weeks or more. But, you know, we've lost nothing by trying. And the other thing is, as I'll say in a moment, the funding has to allow this. So you've got to be allowed to fail. The funding can't be, you will get 800 people online by this time next year. It's got to be, well, you need to be able to try this out because you just can't be sure it's going to work or not. So we asked people what works, what's a good session, and how does how does the best kind of online activity work? And so the consensus overall was that you do need skilled session leaders and diverse activities. Some of these things are exactly what you need when you're doing activities in person, right? That you need smaller live and interactive sessions with some peer exchange. So you don't want something where people are just being talked at, even if it's live. People need to be able to respond to each other as well. Even if it's at the end of the exercise class or between the exercises, they can chat a bit. You need really user-friendly access and proportionate technical support. All of that's really important because if people have a bad experience, chances are it'll put them off for good. And then the other thing, as I think Ian mentioned, it's about those trusting relationships that already exist being the most powerful thing to help older people online. And then in general, I think it's about those hybrid services, you know, combine those online and offline activities to give people more choice. And people always like this bit, so I'm coming to an end now, but I thought you would just like these things. Some of the things that people did blew my mind and was so much fun. So one of them, well, I mean, I joined a quiz and found myself quite bouncy and excited for the rest of the day, you know, a bit of that sort of reflexive quality to the research. But when the Notting Hill Carnival was cancelled, people organised their own Notting Hill Carnival in their living rooms, and someone was talking about how difficult it was to fit their costume in the living room. There was an organisation who did a men's shed online, so they posted materials to people to use through the post, and then they were able to do that online. People doing virtual tours of museums and so on. Someone did an amazing virtual orchestra for people who'd had strokes, and so people were able to conduct the orchestra and so on, all sorts of fascinating stuff with specialists. And then another one, which I thought was great, was someone running classes on mindfulness for sleep at about 9 o'clock at night, which meant that people could actually do them from bed. You know, it's amazing what people will do when they're able to be flexible and just try things out. And so the thing then is, what's the role of funders here? When I talked to them, lockdowns had really changed perspectives, and they said previously they and the trustees had been quite skeptical. And I heard some quite positive noises from NHS commissioners, especially because a lot of the work that they've been doing for exercise and so on, and classes around diet and things, have moved online. Especially, it has to be said, where they were run by local charities. There was less of that in the private sector, actually, in things that they commissioned in the NHS itself. And I think, again, just to stress, the flexible funding is what allowed this to happen. The fact that most funders said, look, you're going to have to change everything you do what you think works. This is what allowed people to make this difference and make this change. And I think there's a bit of a danger of losing ground now, because people are saying, well, we're going back to restricted funding. We can only do things that we're sure about, and we can't necessarily afford to offer all of these things at once. What's going to happen now? And that, I think, is over to the funders. So my final slide, my conclusions. As you've seen, many of those users found online group activities really reduced their sense of isolation, gave them a sense of community and meaning and purpose. But let's be clear, nobody wants to lose in-person activities. And for some people, these activities will never be right. But for some people, it's giving them an option that's having a massive positive difference on their quality of life. And I think the thing that's coming across is that people who are running these things are emphasizing choice and options for people. And it's really important when we go forward that we reassure older people that we're not doing yet more digital coercion here. We're not taking more things away from them, because they're quite right to be worried about that, because people keep doing it. And I think, obviously, as Ian said, the training and support is vital. Without that, you're not going to include anywhere near as many people, but it's got to be proportionate, it's got to be right. I think overall, I'd just like to highlight the power of digital to include, as of course to exclude, and hope that we can help organizations to see the opportunities that it brings as well as barriers. And that at the end of the day, this is one more tool in the toolbox, and a pretty powerful tool at that. But it's that in the same way that a minibus is a powerful tool. You know, it's something that you can use that could make a big difference for the people it's right for. Thank you.
Alex, that was great. Thank you very much for that. There's some great content in there that I'm going to reel you back in during the panel discussion, particularly around trust and options and, you know, hybrid. So there's a lot in there to unpack. And we had a couple of questions that came in during the session. I encourage others to add their questions. We're going to start with those first come, first served basis as an incentive to get your questions in now. But we're going to get to them after our next speaker, who we're very lucky to have Dr. Helen Crampon with us today, who joins us from Innovation Technology Lead for Innovate UK, the Healthy Aging Challenge. UKRI is the National Innovation Agency supporting business-led innovation for all sectors. technologies in UK regions, helping businesses grow through the development and commercialization of new products, processes, and services. Helen has a wealth of experience undertaking and using evidence to shape research and development policies, including recent research work on the impact of investment in healthy aging. So with that, Helen, may I bring you in to have the next word?
You may, and I'm sort of a bit, don't know how to follow that, Alex, anyway, but I'll try.
You got lots of good slides.
I thought you were going to end on the comment and over to the funders, but you just carried on, so that was all right. I pretend you never said that. No, that was really great. Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to speak. And I just want to comment again on the last thing that Alex said about something to use. So, you know, this is something that over the past 4 years working in this sector, I've become, you know, highly aware of the people actually, they just need something, they need a solution, they need something to use. And that, you know, that is so important, and something that I think has been missed for quite a long time. So yeah, really interesting. So yeah, I'm an innovation lead, so for the Healthy Aging Challenge at Innovate UK, as Eric said, and I'm one of 3 innovation leads. I'm not the only one, by the way. I don't run the whole show. And as Eric said, we are UK Research and Innovation, so I'm sure you all know what we do. We fund innovation, and we try to focus our efforts on the really difficult issues in society and try and have impact and deliver benefits for that society whilst growing the economy. We work within 9 councils. So again, I'm sure you're all aware of this. So within those councils, we cover just about everything that, you know, that it is possible to cover, from space research to deep tech, med tech, you name it. We fund businesses that are working in these environments. So the Healthy Aging Challenge kicked off around about 2018-19 with a vision of, actually the mission was to give everybody 5 extra healthy years of life. So we were given 5 years to do that. Yeah, we'll see. I'm sure there are people out there who will have 5 years of extra healthy life because of what we've done. And actually, I think that is probably true. But, you know, to be given that mission and to achieve in 5 years, we knew we weren't going to do it, but we really knew that we were going to make some inroads and try to make some changes. Somebody not on mute?
I think we've got someone, if someone, could everyone go on mute? That'd be helpful, please. Thank you.
So what we've tried to do is work across 7 themes. So those 7 themes have kind of shaped everything that we've done over the past 4 years. And it's been really exciting because we're very different from a lot of other challenges, because we're less focused, should I say, on a specific thing. We have looked at all of these different areas. So we cover everything from homes to physical activity, cognitive impairment, and that gives us a really good opportunity to try and fund as many services as we can that are going to bring as many as many benefits as possible to older adults. So again, where we're slightly different is we've had quite a hefty research element to the whole challenge. So we have our own research director, and we've actually funded research projects, which again is quite unusual in the ISCF challenges. We've had a lot of very successful catalysts. They're called the Catalyst Awards. So a lot of academics have come out of the university, and we are helping them to commercialize their products. So these are the guys that are doing that research like Alex is doing. We are helping them to come up with products that are actually going to do what they've said it's going to do in the paper, and then help them commercialize that. I run something called investment partnerships as well, which I'm not going to talk too much about, but this really is about changing the hearts and minds of commercial investors. So investors don't particularly like investing in aging products. There's lots and lots of different reasons for that. And we've tried to help them change their behavior. And actually, it's been really successful, especially when it comes to social enterprises. We also run the social ventures program, which is obviously what we're here to talk about today. This is a pilot, so this is a brand new thing for UKRI. They've never ever funded social enterprises. The government have, but UKRI haven't. And this was really, really exciting for us. It became clear quite early on that social enterprises and charities were filling a massive gap. And the gap, actually, it's amazing that these guys can do what they do with the limited resources they have. So we tried to come up with a clever way to give them 100% funding. So most of our funding models, you have to come with some money. That's just the way it works. And a lot of social enterprises just don't have that capital. So we made this possible through SBRI, so you could get unlock that 100% funding, which would cover all of your project costs. And this is a game changer for lots of projects like this. So our first round was really aimed at feasibility studies, smaller projects around about 50,000, but it gave those smaller projects that much needed money to just do the feasibility and then come back to us and say, look what I've got, now I can scale. And this is where this program's come in. We're looking at much bigger projects and scaling them, regionally, nationally, internationally as well. And there are other, we have other work streams in there as well: design for aging, mindset, mental health products around VR and XR. I won't go into a lot of detail about that, but I am available for questions, obviously, and you will get my email if you want to come back to me for further questions. So we had 98 million to spend, and I'm quite glad to say we've nearly spent it all. Not quite, we've got a little bit that we need to get out of the door. And we have funded 180 projects, which is really, really good. And we've worked, worked really hard with some brilliant investors through investor partnerships. And, as I said, we've had our first charity on board. So UKRI don't really work with charities as investors, but we've kind of changed the way that people think internally and externally. So that was really exciting as well. And we've tried again, which is slightly different within Innovate UK, to look at projects or businesses that are from, as I say, from academic. So this is even pre-startup to micro to medium to much, much bigger. So we have some quite big projects that we're funding called the Trailblazers. They're big service providers. So they're in the millions, millions of pounds, whereas going back down to academic, they could maybe get 20 to 50,000, of grant. So, we've really tried to cover early to late stage and fill the gap where it's needed, where they're not getting the funds they need to cross that bridge from, market readiness into scale. And the other thing we've really tried to address, and we've not been as successful as we wanted to be, I don't think, and this is around the regional, so the reach we've had regionally. So we all know where the pockets of deprivation are. We've really tried hard to reach those pockets. And this is where social enterprises come in. They work at community levels. They understand what the community needs. And that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to work, at ground level with these guys, so, that they can address the needs of the people that they understand. And as you can see by this map, it's still heavily weighted to certain areas. And I don't know if that will ever change, but we are working quite hard to drive that change. I talked briefly about investor partners. So, this is a commercially driven program where investors will put 50% of funding into a business through equity. They will take equity in that business, and we will align to that amount of money through funding. So you in essence get 100% of your project costs covered. It's a 50-50 split between us and the investor. This has been really, really successful. We work with some really good impact investors, social impact investors, who are not only interested in making money for themselves and their business and their stakeholders, but also for the business, and actually what they really want to see is social impact delivered to the people who are using the end product. So, we've got some great people like Social Tech Trust, Nesta and others, and some charities as well. And something that's really been interesting is a lot of the commercial investors we've worked with, such as 24 Haymarket, for instance, very, very venture capital, very focused on revenue. They actually invested in their first social enterprise this year. And this was a social enterprise that came through our program. So they got early stage funding, they then got funding through SBRI and so on. And then they're investable. You know, an investor looked at them in a different light, and they've actually gone and put quite a substantial amount of money into them. So it just, you know, it just tells the story that as a social enterprise, it doesn't mean that you have to be locked into this funding cycle. There are opportunities, and for you know, businesses like OpenAge, it's very clear there is a commercial model here that can be exploited, and then the money can go back into the community. That's what we're really trying to achieve here. I'm not going to go through these, but the slides will be available. You know, this is just an example of some of the projects that we've funded. And it just gives you a flavour of the types of projects. So, you know, these are services, they're service-led, they could be product-led. So we've got some very high-tech products, we've got some diagnostics, and we've got some bigger service providers who are working in environments and housing projects as well. So these are on the slides, so, you know, go and have a look at them. We have something called the community of practice, which we've used to bring together all of our products and projects into one place where there's a community building now. And within that website, all of our projects can be seen. So if anybody wants to go in there and have a look and learn a bit more about what we're doing, then, you know, get in touch and I can give you the links as you need them. And I think just to end, because I think, you know, why are we funding OpenAge? I think what Alex said, and Ian and Eric before, I don't think I need to say too much more about why we're funding this. But, you know, social isolation is one of the biggest killers now, which is actually really, I don't know, sobering. It's depressing, actually, isn't it, to think that that is killing people. And I think what's brilliant about this project is it's combining all of those things together to bring people together. So the social isolation is being, you know, addressed, the physical activity is being addressed, mental well-being. And I think one of the things I love about this is you've still got a person helping somebody. I think that's really important for older people, and it's what they tend to ask for. They want to talk to somebody. They don't want an app to go through a training program, because they want somebody to help them, you know, and I think that's where, you know, OpenAge do this really, really well. And I could go on and on, but I won't, so I'll stop there.
Well, I'll listen, Helen, if you want to keep going, but yeah, no, well, and maybe you can put the link to the community of practice in the chat so people can join, and you have a conference in November that people should attend, maybe, if you want to.
Yes, I should actually. I think we do have a link for that now. 13th, 14th of November. It's at the Oval in London, and, you know, this is a opportunity for the Healthy Aging Challenge to showcase all of our projects. We will also have investors in the room, policy makers, academics. So, you know, it's going to be a really, really vibrant conference if you can come down for some or all of it.
Highly recommended. So thanks for joining us, Helen. We're lucky to have you here today. So it's a great lineup, and there's lots of really good content. And so, frankly, what I find the best thing that happens during these kinds of events is the interaction, the questions that you get, and the interaction we get between the various people. So there were some questions that came in during the presentations. We're very grateful for those who have come in. If you have questions that come up as we go along, feel free to continue to add to the questions in the chat here. So I am going to start with the first question, which I absolutely love. It's a favorite topic of mine, and I, like Helen, won't talk forever because I think you should hear from our panel. But there was a question around, do you think is there any transferable learning that can be applied to tech-enabled health and social care? I'm going to start, and then I'm going to hand it over where I'm going to start actually came across in Ian's slides, and it came across in Alex's comments as well. Eileen, your question about learning, for me, the biggest learning around enabled tech for health and social care is actually non-tech. One of the things that, as chairman of OpenAge, as Ian was describing to me, the impact that OpenAge had, part of the reason it was successful was that it was a trusted social network. It was a trusted relationship. One of the reasons why we were successful in getting so many people to go from 100% online to 100% offline, in person, to 100% online, was the fact that we were a trusted relationship before lockdown happened. I think trust cannot be underestimated in terms of the importance of being successful at addressing the digital opportunity. And I use the word digital opportunity because there was another comment about making sure it's inclusion and not exclusion, and including everyone. It's quite important to, not everyone came online, and as Alex said, it's not for everyone, but it's an important option. And one of the things that Ian said during the presentation was that we have now some people who don't come back into the facilities, and part of that's because they became more frail, more immobile during lockdown. Some of it prefer to have it. It was only 10-15%, but we have a hybrid model now that we're really fortunate to have the Innovate UK funding to help us to scale that. But I think that option is really important. But so for me, the really important aspect that can be transferred to health and social care is leveraging trusted social networks. Alex had that in some of his slides, but I brought Ian to come talk to the folks down in the Kent Surrey Sussex Academic Health Science Network. They're creating a framework for digital enablement. NHS is offering more and more of their services online, and I think the key thing that NHS was doing was not forcing people to go online, but motivating people to go online. Here are all the benefits, and supporting people in going about doing all of that. But the thing that Ian and I really pushed for this digital framework was leverage trusted social networks. So Ian, I'm gonna let you expand on all of that. Over to you.
Sure. I would agree with everything you said. I would add something slightly different as well, round about when it comes to health and social care technology. So I think that we know there is a drive from both health and social care to increase access to online services from older people, which is a reasonable objective as long as one takes into consideration that actually there are people who are digitally excluded and one needs to train those people up. I think the learning for me here is that the people that took part at Open Age during lockdown didn't take part thinking they were going to make friends. They didn't take part thinking that they were going to get all the benefits that they did get from it. They took part because, to an extent, it was the only game in town at the time, and then they realized that there's loads of benefits there as well. What they wouldn't have done was taken part if I'd have said, learn this and you'll be able to access your GP online, or learn this and you will be able to kind of sort of access social care services elsewhere. So I think the big learning for health and social care is you need to get people online first. Then once they're comfortable with it, then once they can see the benefits of it, that's when they're going to start accessing their GP. But to start from a position of, here's some online services, how do we get you onto them? I think it is a deficit approach that is never really going to be particularly successful. That to me is the big learning. Start by showing the benefits, start by showing the fun side that we all use with apps and etc. And then people will move from there.
Ian, I love that phrase, the deficit approach. For me, I think that is absolutely fundamental in terms of what Open Age does not do. It really, talks to what motivates people, and I think that actually is what gets people to do these kinds of things. Dr. Alex, may I bring you in to comment on what can health and social care learn on all of this?
I think, first of all, what Ian said there, especially that idea that I remember someone saying to me that it's no use saying to someone, she gave an example of an old man who she worked with who everyone was saying, look, you could do your online shop on Sainsbury's. And he was like, ugh. But then she said, but you could watch BT Sport. And then suddenly that was interesting. And that's the thing. What do you want You know, that's the thing. It's got to be about what you want. And the other thing, I think, is just the importance of sort of ethical behavior here, really, which is that it is really important that you're doing this for the benefit of older people, and you're not doing this stuff because it's efficient, you know, or solely because it's efficient, and where that efficiency actually overrides their basic human needs. And I certainly think that goes across the whole of health and social care. Certainly, we know that on some occasions, these things are being done because they're cheaper, or because they're more convenient for the service provided, you know, not for the older people themselves. Realizing, of course, that there's always a sort of realism and a balance that has to be made between the two. But all I can say is the older people we talk to could smell that coming a mile off, and know full well when they're just being sort of badly treated and taken away from.
Helen, you have the enviable position of sitting across a wide spectrum, and you know you've got this helicopter view. You know, are there things that you can kind of pull from this and say this is something that health and social care might be able to learn from?
I definitely, I agree with everything that's been said. I think, you know, one of the things that we've seen a lot of I'll just say I talk to businesses every week, and a lot of them are digital platforms aimed at older adults, and you can see straight away that they have actually not been designed for the person that it's intended for. So I think a point was just made about co-design. And I you know, it's so important to speak to the person first before you even think about your product or what you're trying to do. You go out and you talk to the person that you're aiming it at, because you know that they will tell you if it's rubbish or not. And I generally do quite a lot say, no, that's rubbish, go away and come back, you know, when you've spoken to the person that you want to design it for. One of the things we have seen, though, is going back to the point around efficiency, is that we do need to work on efficiency within primary and, you know, secondary social care. But what we've seen some very, very clever solutions for carers, for GPs, for clinicians, actually, so they can carry on seeing the patient. So a physiotherapist can actually have more time to see the patient. So that is where I think technology comes in. It's actually freeing up the time that clinicians need to spend with the person, instead of replacing the person with an app, which is absolutely, I have to say, probably not what young people want anyway. You know, young people say all the time, young people use, you know, technology and they'd be happy with a virtual GP. But actually, I think a lot of people would rather speak to a human being. So I don't think we're just talking about older adults here when we talk about, you know, health. I mean, social care, again, you know, we've got a fantastic project we're funding that are looking at how to help carers go into people's homes, and you know, where that person needs a minimum amount of care. They don't need, you know, hours and hours and hours of care. It gets people back into their homes and helps them stay at home for longer. So they're using technology to do that. Actually, it's not the end user that's using the technology.
It's funny, actually, Helen, one of the things was older people saying as well, in terms of that efficiency, that look, if I had to come in on a minibus, or if I had to get in there, I could do exercise once a week. With this, I can do exercise every single day. And I think it's on both sides. You know, it allows you to spend more time on the people who most need the support and on the things that are most important. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
We got a few more questions. That's a rich topic that I'd love to dig some more on. So if you've got more questions, please put them in the chat, or we can put comments and follow up later. But there's a question from Philip around, was safety and security online a key factor to people accessing key services, particularly banking and financial services? Ian, you kind of talked about this in your last answer, but maybe I think, you know, you were talking about maybe bringing people in online and then what services they might want to use. Did it eventually get to the banking or financial services, or was it just the more basic stuff?
So I think Alex is probably better placed than I to comment on whether financial services came up in his research. What I can say is that through a variety of other projects, OpenAge has been involved in working with the likes of NatWest and Santander, and them accessing some of our members to talk about financial services. I think you're right to flag that safety and security comes up. However, and I flag this as saying I think this is a personal opinion, I'm not sure whether it would be backed up. Maybe Alex can come in a second and tell me whether it is or not. I personally think we go a little bit too far in flagging the issues of security online with older people, and I think it comes down to that idea of infantilizing people a little bit. Yes, you can point out that there are issues in the same way that if you go to a cash machine and you take money out, you probably have a look round about you to see if anyone's there. The same is true. There's certain behavior you can do online, but I think we've got to the point, and we've had members tell us this, you've got to where people think just by opening an email, just by reading a text, that actually that somehow or other they've done something terrible, that they've let people in. They've not taken the next step because they've read it and they thought that looks a bit dodgy. Well, that's fine. We've all done that. We all read things and that's a bit dodgy, and we don't take the next step. And I know I'm safe by that. But a lot of older people think, oh, that's the point at which they've done something wrong, because every message you give about digital inclusion with older people seems to be tagged on at the end with beware of scams, beware of scams. And I think that there could be a little bit more of a balance in that approach. I note that Phil's from the Good Things Foundation. I'd be quite interested to know whether he agrees with me on that or not. But yeah, Alex, happy to see whether you agree with my comments or not.
Yeah, I do, absolutely. I've got an interesting perspective as well, because I'm actually married to a fraud specialist, not someone who does fraud, I should be clear. I think one of the things that's interesting is that actually people aren't frightened enough of other things, like, for example, what comes via the telephone, which often then involves a computer. But I think a lot of those things are more worrying than anything. Certainly, I found that people were super worried about it, to the extent that I found it really hard to get people to give me consent in the normal way, because they didn't want to click a thing on Google, Google Forms to say that they consented and so on. And some people actually, some of the interviewees were actually frightened to talk to me without someone from Open Age, because they were so worried about this strange person on the line and what they might be doing. But yeah, other older people were very pragmatic about it. But again, actually, one of the things was they felt a little bit of sort of hostility towards banks and so on, in the sense that they were being forced to do things online, and those very people at the same time were telling them that the most terrifying place online and the most unsafe place online place to be for banking is online. You know what I mean? So they felt like they were very mixed messages as well. A lot of that stuff came through. If I can say that one of the most alarming things that I heard from multiple sources was actually about telecoms companies and their selling techniques to people. And I heard quite a lot of stories which were very worrying about older people who've been sold incredibly complex and extremely expensive contracts that then they couldn't get out of. This wasn't scammers phoning them. This was actually sort of major multinational corporations. And one person described it as borderline financial abuse, which I think in some cases it is.
Speaking of financial, I'm going to quickly... Sorry? Yeah, right. I'll pick that up. There was a question from Tina about debt issues because people can't afford the internet charges and they get support. I think I'll start this and then hand over. I'll hand over to you, Alex, for the research. I keep handing over to Ian, and then he gives it back to you. Maybe you could do the same back to Ian, fill in on all of this. But I think. Ian, you said Phil was from the Good Things Foundation. I was just going to quote some Good Things Foundation research, actually. And I was going to put it in the chat, but if it's everyone knows, I'll put it in the chat and see how it goes. But I mean, I think there are 4 or 5 different reasons why people don't get on the internet, and cost is one of them. Motivation tends to be a big one. Skills, confidence. Are others. There are 5 million people in the UK who have not used the internet. 2/3 of them are over 65, and there are a number who are over 85 who have used it and no longer use it. Sometimes it's dementia related, but cost isn't one of the major reasons why people haven't been on the internet. Now, that doesn't minimize your question, Tina. I think it's an absolutely spot on question. there are social tariffs that are available, but then I go back to the comment that Alex just made about trusting the telecoms operators on all of that. They've just been pulled up by Ofcom in terms of not offering those social contracts. So you can get broadband at a very affordable rate. Accessing them, I think, is part of the challenge. But Alex, maybe I can bring you in to comment on that in terms of affordability. Did that come up in your survey? You're on mute. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting again that it didn't. I suppose what's quite interesting, I did talk to people who were using it and people who weren't using it. I don't think anyone who didn't use it told me that that was why they weren't using it. So you would have expected it to come across there. And then I guess for the people who were using it, you know, in general, they could afford it. But yeah, it wasn't something that came across strongly. I think the only other thing that came across was that sometimes people are it's easy to get hold of a device. Someone will give you a hand-me-down device, or sometimes there are some organizations who give them out. But then the thing is, once you have that, you know, actually finding a way to sort of financially sort of continue that can be quite difficult. That was from the organization side, but older people themselves didn't really mention it, no.
So Ian, is there anything you want to comment on it?
I don't think so. No, I mean, kind of, I think most of the charities that I'm aware of that are working in this space do try to do something round about devices and data. And there are organizations that it is easier to get cheaper data from. But again, when I went to an event a couple of months ago, held by SASE, I think they're called. I think it's the South London event. But there was a researcher there talking about older people in the Highlands and Islands in Scotland and talking about isolation. But essentially, the crux of her comment was, if someone's living in a Highland and Island, they're probably living there, and they're older, they're living there because they want to be there, but they also recognise if they're going to be there, they're happy to pay for services that connect them elsewhere, because it's kind of sort of a mix of what. So I think kind of, I suppose my takeaway from that is I think it depends on location as well. If you're in a remote area, there's the possibility that you recognise you've got to pay for it. But if you're in somewhere like London, I think arguably maybe, yeah, cost might become more of a factor.
Yeah.
No, actually, we did get that from one organization who were very rural, and they said, actually, the thing is that most people here, if they didn't have the internet, they wouldn't get anything. So they just have to get it by hook or by crook. Obviously, there'll be some people who fall through the cracks, but they thought in general, actually, people were far more likely to have it.
Helen, if I can bring you in on this topic, because internet access is one of those things that's fundamental to most of your technology solutions in the portfolio. You have, what'd you say, 180 projects. I would say probably 179 are digitally related.
Not
you
that
know,
many.
yeah. So
yeah, most, and I think for us, you know, the cost element. Gloria's dancing. Sorry, Gloria's having a party. We look around to Gloria's. I think one thing we have noticed, just talking about cost, is just after Christmas, we noticed that a lot of our businesses that rely on B2C, so that rely on direct subscription from the consumer, there was quite a big tail off. So when things like you know, what's happening now in the economy hits, the first things to go are actually you know, there are things like that. So that it would be, you know, like a fitness app, or maybe a diabetes tracking app, or something like that, which isn't actually seen as a necessity. It's seen as a luxury because they need to buy food and switch the heating on. So we have noticed that, and we have worked with a couple of I mean, for instance, MasterCard. So MasterCard are looking into this. They're looking into, you know, the behaviours of older adults and where they can focus their efforts to make things easier for older adults. And obviously, there are a lot of older adults out there that do have some cognitive impairment. So if they haven't got an advocate or somebody to help them, then they're incredibly vulnerable. And I think that's where this fear plays into the whole kind of internet, using the internet, and you know, and things like that. And again, you know, we're funding projects that are looking at intergenerational connections. So, you know, young people helping older people to get online and navigate the internet and things like that. So there's so many things that can be done. I think, you know, I can't remember who said it earlier around cost. I think to get on the internet, you have to be on the internet, don't you? So I think most people, you know, are on the internet or try to get onto the internet. They have, you know, you have to make that kind of sacrifice. It might be one of the last things to go for a lot of people, because that really is cutting you off from society altogether, isn't it? I would say for many people. It's become more and more of a utility, almost like water, isn't it, for people? I think the key thing for me was what Alex was saying in terms of just accessing the right tariff. Accessing those social tariffs is the challenge. They're available. There was a recent article on BBC about how Ofcom was really trying to get more people on those that should be on those, and rather than be cut off from this utility, getting them on the right tariff. But let me move on to the next question. Harriet had a question in terms of what were the most used technologies and best ways to get people online. Was it Zoom, Teams, WhatsApp, for instance? Alex, do you want to start on that? And then you can hand it back to Ian.
I think I'll hand it back to Ian quite quickly, actually. It wasn't really something that we explored. I think I get the feeling that Zoom was most common because Teams is usually bundled up with Office and so on. I think there's something to be said there. There's an awful lot of effort put into building new tools and developing new things, which is great, you know, bespoke things if people are involved and so on. But there's also something to be said for something that's very widely used, because you're far more likely to meet someone else who knows how to use it and the neighbor to be able to come in and help you out with it. So I think that's maybe one reason why people used a lot of Zoom and things like that. But
Ian, over to you. Yeah. You want to come off mute? You're on mute, Ian.
There you go. I'm not sure whether I can answer that question specifically, but I can give you some examples of where I think the technology is dependent on what you're trying to achieve. So the vast majority of what we delivered during lockdown was via Zoom. It did work very well. I think there is an argument to say actually it got to the point where it was so ubiquitous that everyone at least knew what Zoom was, therefore there was an element of trust there, and actually, okay, it's fair enough, that's what everyone's using, we'll use that. But for example, we ran an art class using WhatsApp, and it was hugely successful because it was a way for people to take pictures of their art, for them to share it on a group, for there to be that constant interaction, but still in an activity that's quieter, let's put it that way. It is a kind of a self-directed activity that you're doing something, you can take a picture of it and then share it, and you can get feedback from the group or feedback from the tutor. Flip side of that, though, a bit of a concern round about WhatsApp is the personal data GDPR side of things, because actually what you're not doing with Zoom is you're not sharing anyone's phone number. People are clicking in. When the meeting ends, it's over. Therefore, from a safeguarding point of view, from a kind of privacy point of view, OpenAge was more comfortable with that, whereas we had to get consents with the WhatsApp to make sure that we were happy to share people's phone numbers. I'm not sure whether there's an exciting technological way around about that I'm unaware of or not. I'd also got a little bit even lower tech than that. We massively increased our phone groups during lockdown as well, and actually conference calls, really great. Still needs to be a slightly smaller group because it needs to be manageable. It needs to be quite a structured activity, otherwise you've just got everyone talking over each other. But phone groups increase and have continued to increase actually for OpenAge. What I'd also put there though is they're hugely expensive, phone groups. If you don't want to pass over that cost to your constituent, then you're looking at taking that cost yourself. And that's certainly from an OpenAge perspective, that's something that we've seen a big increase in our costs associated with that. But again, it comes down to what is it that we're trying to achieve. Are we trying to achieve the ability for people who wouldn't normally access to access? If that's the case, then we can't really be putting that extra cost onto someone, in particular when we know not everyone hangs up when they're meant to, and therefore that there's an issue around it. But that's I'm not sure whether I answered the question other than to say I think it's kind of horses for courses, really.
Ian, I'm going to come straight back to you on the next question, which is how can this research inform service providers or funders going forward? And there's a second part to that that I'll come back to.
Sure. So how can it inform service delivery going forward? I think it's about making sure that we are providing choice. I think the default position should not be OpenAge will not or could not or should not work for older people. I think the default position has got to be there should be choice, and that having an online service can increase that choice, whether it's people being able to access more services or whether it's people choosing to access via one route or another. I think it is here to stay. I think it should be here to stay. And this doesn't really quite make sense, but older people only get younger, if you know what I mean. Yeah, everyone here sitting here using it. We're going to be using Zoom. It makes sense for us to start investing in it now. The bit about funders, I would say, and Alex made the point really, really clearly, there needs to be flexibility. I think the reason so much exciting stuff happened in lockdown, and I'm sure there's many people here from charities, you'll have heard the same thing. All of our local authority partners said, oh my God, it was amazing to work with you during lockdown, the way you were able to get to your communities, the way you were able to respond. Well, the reason we were able to do that is because everyone said, do you know what, we trust you to do what you do. Go on and do it. They didn't put the strictures around about how we had to use the funding as long as we achieved the outcomes. So I think the big learning, not just for online, but I would say for the sector as a whole, should be trust charities, trust your voluntary sector to do what it does best. It delivers for our beneficiaries. Stop handcuffing us and telling us that we can't do X, Y, and Z. We know how to spend our money best.
It's really interesting, Ian, because I think some of the funders I talked to, they really felt like they'd really changed their mind. But then you could see that they were saying, but I've just noticed, and they were seeing that other people around them were starting to sort of slide back again, as it always does, because we've been doing this, the circle on unrestricted funding for 20 odd years, haven't we, at least?
100%, Alex. I mean, we are seeing that all over the place just now, where people just going back into the same old patterns again and saying, actually, this is what we want to achieve. But by the way, you've got to go through this, you've got to go through that, you've got to apply this way, you've got to that, rather than saying, we know you're the organization that can do it, here's the money to go and do it.
And Ian, I think one of the things that you mentioned it a little bit, but I want to build on that. It was successful what you did during lockdown. I think you said you were one of the most successful charities to convert from 100% offline to online. And you shared a lot of your findings with others. Is that right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we've tried to, within the boroughs that we're the most active in, which is kind of sort of Royal Borough of Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster, Hammersmith and Fulham, we've tried to kind of, I suppose, start to be thought leaders within the area, try to talk about what could be done differently. I think we're lucky because we've got a good evidence base to be able to fall back on now. So if we can start to champion how things can be done and be done differently, then I think we've got a role to play in that.
Yeah. So the second part of that question is, how is OpenAge looking to act on these research findings? I mean, there's the Innovate UK project, which we're very grateful for. As you say, the world has changed and hybrid is here to stay. I think that's sort of obvious stuff, but is there more that you'd want to maybe build on that, Ian?
To be honest, I'm not sure whether there is more to build on it than that, Eric. I think the main thing for us is, I mean, kind of the Innovate UK project to try and develop OpenAge online is a big piece of work. I think people mentioned earlier on in the chat about co-production, that at the absolute core of this is we've been working with older people. We use the Design Council Double Diamond methodology to really go out there and speak to a whole mix of audiences to make sure that we understand what do older people want, what might end customers want if those customers are not going to be older people. How can we make sure that we're meeting everyone's objectives so that we're designing something that not just meets older people, that's important, but it meets the people that might pay for its needs as well, so that hopefully we end up with a service that people are willing to pay for and therefore willing to increase access to older people. But I think the learning from that will inform everything that we do going forward with OpenAge in terms of those continued online services.
Helen, I'm going to bring you in on this. Was there anything from Innovate UK's perspective that you think we ought to be leveraging here?
And I think there's a couple of things. I think, you know, it's difficult, obviously, because talking specifically about the Healthy Aging Challenge, it's wrapping up. So we've only got until March 24. So, you know, we actually don't know from the spending review what we're going to get and where we're going to be able to spend it on aging or longevity. Now, it will be that we are capitalizing upon on that in the way we should stay flexible. You're dead right, it's worked. I don't know why we can't carry on doing what we're doing, because it's working really well, and that's not actually just not a question I can answer without getting really cross. I think the other thing is we need to focus on building this ecosystem. So one of the things that, you know, we're really trying to build is an ecosystem around aging and longevity. So this is bringing together everybody that works in this space. It could be housing, it could be social housing providers, it could be anything, and, you know, getting those stakeholders together to actually drive you know, where we should focus our efforts next. And then it needs to be in policy. There needs to be something written in policy that's going to drive what we all do next, if you know what I mean. And I think that's the only way that we can, you know, carry on building on what we have so far. And I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but I really hope that we don't miss the opportunity to carry on doing what we have been doing, because it's been brilliant. And I think the Healthy Aging Conference is going to really show people what we have done over the past 4 years. And as I've said, there will be policymakers in that audience. So fingers crossed they'll sit up and say, well, yeah, look, you know, look what they've done. Give them more money to carry on doing it.
No, absolutely. And so I guess building on that, there's a question that came in as well. It said, if you could change one thing about current funding mechanisms for services for older adults besides higher funding, right? What would that be? So how do we avoid what you just discussed? I'll put it back to you, Helen, and then maybe we can share it around the room.
I think it all comes from policy, doesn't it? So it all comes from the government. If somebody steps up and says, we need to spend this much money on this, and it should be, you know, it needs to be innovation based, you know, we need to drive innovation and we need to take risks. That's the other thing. So innovation is risky. And, you know, I think, as Alex said, or Ian, you know, if things fail, and actually they fail a lot in innovation. So there's that risk averse nature within government and public, you know, public services, that they just don't like it. So I think aging products are quite risky, and they're very long term as well. So the benefits aren't seen for quite a long time. And I just think we need as far as, if I could have whatever I wanted, I would have 150 million to spend on longevity, and that would it. That'd be it. They'd just let me get on with it, and we'd do what, you know, we'd do what we have been doing. But we'd go out there, as I said, and we'd have an ecosystem to engage with, and find out what people need and what people want. Whether that's people who are making the stuff, inventing the stuff, the academics, and then the actual end users. So the voice of the older person. What do you need right now? I think that's crucial, and that doesn't happen very often, does it? So doom and gloom. It's not doom and gloom.
Yeah. Fair enough. Ian, anything to build on that?
I think if there's anything I could change is if I try to put a positive spin on it, then moving on from Helen's doom and gloom. So I think that the introduction of integrated care and integrated care systems, I think, does create an opportunity for services for older people, because I think actually, finally, we are looking at that gap, the crack between adult social care and prevention. I think my concern, though, is that we've introduced integrated care systems, but we've not actually integrated budgets. So while everyone's still talking about we now need to work integratedly, the fact is that prevention is still falling down the middle because the budgets still aren't coming together. So I think if the one thing I could ask was let's if we're going down the route of integrated care, if that's the future, let's integrate it properly. Let's bring risk and reward and financial sharing together so that there is actually an incentive to move funding towards services that, in Helen's words, are going to increase longevity, and in my words, are targeted at prevention for older people, that are actually starting to do something to be able to take the pressure off health and social care by intervening early.
Nice and crunchy proposal. I like those hard answers, Ian. Thanks. Alex, is there anything that you would recommend? One thing that could be recommended to funders doing differently?
I mean, I think I've already said that in terms of the kind of sectors that we're working with here, I think, you know, charities, the unrestricted funding or the flexible funding, I think you saw such a sea change and such a difference. And if anyone ever wanted to see an example of what can happen if you trust people to make the right decisions, this is it.
Yeah. So Harriet has a question around lack of use of the internet, partly due to not knowing anything interesting for them. So maybe this is some of the motivation question, just not knowing what's available. I mean, I think, you know, in my experience, you know, oh, would you want to go on the internet? People say, no, that's okay. Oh, would you like to talk to your granddaughter in Australia? All of a sudden you get a lot of interest, you know, making people aware of those kinds of things. Alex, was there anything in the research that you might want to point to on that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, what was really interesting was just the practicality of trying to find things. So as I was there trying to look around for what other stuff there was, if I hadn't had people who knew things already and were actually able to point me in the right direction, it was incredibly hard to find stuff that was happening, online digital stuff, maybe because it's local. But even, for example, some of the bigger commercial providers who started to appear, I would never have found those unless someone had mentioned them to me. So I think there's something there about how people are communicating what is out there. And I think that for services like Open Ages, it's going to be really important. But yeah, stuff is hard to find.
So I'm conscious we've gone a little bit, almost an hour and 45 minutes, which I'm very impressed that we've managed to keep as many people as we have for this long. So obviously you're saying something that people are interested in. We've kept 75% of the audience. I want to make sure if anyone has any last few comments. Let's see, I'm trying to think, start to wrap up. Tina's question quickly, apologies for her, starting lots of people. Yeah, I think let's, why don't we, there's some details in the chat. You got Helen's details. There was a question about sharing of the slides. So there was, these slides are going to be collated and distributed to people who are interested. So make sure that you, Finn, I think we said we're going to email them to everyone. The idea is to disseminate the information as widely as possible. So we encourage everyone to get involved. You got Helen's details there. We've got your registration details. So if there's anything else that you would like us to add, please let us know. We're very grateful that you attended.
Eric, can we also just say, I know that Sarah's here from Dunhill, and just to say a big thank you as well to Dunhill for funding the research.
Thank you. Well, Dunhill, we're very grateful, and I think you said there's ongoing funding as well. That's right. To continue on, Ian.
We're being funded. It's funded from Innovate UK for the.
No, but there was there was the research, but then there was
so the £300,000 digital project is funded through the integrated care system.
Yeah. So lots of good things happening. We're very glad that you're a part of it. Please let us know if there's anything else that you would like to know or want to engage. Alex, you want to have some final words?
Yes, just one more thing. Can I suggest that people go and read the report? Because I'll cry if you don't. So
Helen, last chance for any final comments from you?
No, just you know, my email's out there, so please do connect with me, and even if it's just for chat about what we've talked about.
Okay, well, that's it for me. Ian, any final comments? Good. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for everyone attending. As we said, we'll share all the details. So thank you for your time and look forward to staying in touch and making great things happen on the back of this.